Hello and thank you for joining us on Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines recently. I am Jacinta Agochukwu. This week, President Tinubu inaugurates ministers' mixed portfolio adjustments, brings back Niger Delta Ministry. Also this week, the First Minister's service chiefs gets 1 year to end insecurity. And later on the show, Appeal Court sacks Habure, affirms Apapa as LP National Chairman. Or the details in a moment. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We begin with the reassignment of portfolios to some of the ministers designated by President Bola Tinubu. According to the statement, Abubakar Momo was redeployed from the Federal Ministry of Youth to the Ministry of Niger Delta Development, while Adeboye Oyetola was redeployed as the Minister of Marine and Blue Economy. Senator Henike Lokbobiri was assigned the portfolio of Minister of State Oil Petroleum Resources, while Beribe was named the Minister of State Gas Petroleum Resources. I have joining me to discuss this Olufemi Lawson, Executive Director, Center for Public Accountability, who is in the studio with me, and as well Adams Abono, a political analyst, is joining me from Abuja via Zoom. Let me begin with you, Mr. Olufemi. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Jacinta.
You know very well that the last-minute reshuffling of this minister's portfolio raised a lot of questions, but do you think there's these factors that must have influenced this decision by the president? And how do you think this will impact the respective ministers?
Well, thank you. Beyond the fact that it is within the discretion of the president, the prerogative of the president, to appoint, deploy or redeploy ministers, what the president did with that decision, I think, is very much in line, especially when you look at the antecedent of some of those people whose portfolios were reshuffled. I want to take, for instance, the person of Mr. Boyega Oyetola. For people who are familiar with him, he's an administrator with a proven track record and a very prudent manager of resources for those who have interacted with him closely. And I can tell you that he's one right person that would effectively manage the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy, considering the strategic importance of that ministry to Nigeria's drive towards economic revitalization. And also look at the deployment of Honorable Lubumi Tujojo to the Ministry of Interior. The Ministry of Interior, for a lot of people who don't know, is also a very strategic ministry, has a lot to do with our national security institutions, has a lot to do with our internal affairs as a country. So you need a minister who can be up and doing. You need a young, vibrant person who can not only supervise the prestataries under it, but who can also effectively engage issues that have to do with the internal affairs of the country. And also about the redeployment of Mr. Abubakar Momo, you could understand that from the point this announcement was made initially, there were a lot of criticism about the fact that it would have required a more younger person to man the Ministry of Youth Affairs. And I think that must have warranted the president's decision. I haven't listened to the criticisms generated aftermath of his appointment into the Ministry of Youth Affairs, even before they were sworn in, to redeploy him to the Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs. And the Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs is also a strategic ministry. It's an intervention ministry. And you need somebody who also have the kind of maturity and experience of somebody like Honorable Momo to man that ministry. So far, so good. The president's decision in regard to the redeployment of these few ministers, I think, was very strategic and well thought out.
All right, Mr. Adams, I don't know if you've joined us. Good evening, Mr. Adams. All right, okay. I'm told we don't have Mr. Adams yet. Let's also talk about some of these ministers. We've heard them started speaking about their target and what to achieve, and people like Better I Do add Wike. I want you to help rate how their kick-off approach, how would you rate their kick-off approach so far? And that of Wiki already has generated a lot of controversy and all of that. What can you say?
A lot of these people are coming into office with a lot of zeal. Some of them have the passion, haven't known their antecedent. But I think what is required presently will be more than the initial demonstration of zeal, like we've seen in the last couple of days that they were officially inaugurated as ministers, because this is not a very usual time for us as a country. It's an unusual time. So it will require a lot of sensitive calculations, and carefulness before you approach issues that are confronting Nigeria today. President Tinubu has inherited a very, very, severely injured country in so many strata, and it will require more than, the zeal to come and bulldoze, your way in the office or demonstrate the fact that you have the energy, either because you are young or because you are experienced coming from previous position of public service, to the extent that you have to sit. I understand, and I think the president must sit seriously at a retreat with his minister to actually let them work in line with his agenda. You see, we must avoid a situation whereby Minister A is driving his own mission and Minister B is also driving his own mission, so that we don't end up having contradictions and, a lot of confusion in the administration. So all these ministers must surrender their zeal first and work in line with the aspiration and the agenda of the president. Because no matter how poorly performed or how well performed a minister end up doing, it is going to be to the credit of the administration of President Bola Tinubu. So it must go beyond the zeal being demonstrated by these ministers to the point that they must work in line with the aspiration of Mr. President, in line with the agenda of the president, and that is where those zeal and eagerness should go into, not the personal preferences or their personal wishes, as we are beginning to see in some cases. Before you make promises, before you push out agenda, before you begin to make, statement like it must conform with what the president wants to do, coming into office. It must not be because of how it is done where you are coming from or how it is burning in you. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of confusion at the end of the day, and it may eventually affect negatively the dream of the president, in office.
I kind of agree with you with the idea of the initial gra-gra, like
Yeah,
some Nigerians will call it. But let's look at the idea of monitoring these ministers, aside the idea of KPI that some of the analysts have suggested. Do you in any way see the president reshuffling of his cabinet when he says any form of non-performance and all of that, not to repeat what must have happened in the previous administration? And what would be a reasonable time to assess their performance?
Well, like I said, it's an unusual time. The president, the current administration, did not inherit a so healthy country. So I personally am not currently disposed to the idea of setting 100 days, 200 days target to achieve anything concrete as it is, if we're going to be realistic. That nonetheless, we have from day one began to monitor the performances of the administration, and we will continue to do that as Nigerians on a daily basis. But the only assurance some of us have is that President Tinubu will not be a holidaying president, a president who may even be in the country and will not know what the ministers are doing, like we have had in this country in the past. It's not going to be a minister, a president who will appoint a minister who will openly come and admit later that he never knew the dictates of of his job, while in office. So I am very sure that won't be the case. That nonetheless, you should expect that this kind of president is a president that can reshuffle his cabinet at any given time, considering the fact and the zeal that the administration is bringing on board to transform the current situation. So we may not have a scenario where somebody will be minister in Abuja for 8 years and there'll be no street light this time around. I sincerely hope that will not be. Otherwise, there would be no difference. But I'm very confident there'll be difference with the character of the president and those who have formed the core, of the administration as it is.
Oh, well, the tune of how the next 4 years will be for Nigerians is basically set, with the president, vice president, the Senate, the House of Rep, and now the ministers. Nigerians, we all wish them the very best, and Nigerians are watching, as well the whole world is watching. All right, now let's go for a short break, and Newsweek will return in a moment. Welcome back, and if you're just tuning in, it's Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines recently. Now to our second story for tonight. The federal government gave the service chief a period of 1 year to put an end to any form of insecurity in Nigeria. According to Minister of Defense, Abubakar Badaro has asked them to present a timeline and requirements for ending insecurity across the country. The former Jigawa governor, who assumed duties as defense minister, said his job and that of his junior minister, Bello Matawale, as well as those of the service chief, were at stake if they don't end insecurity in 1 year. I still have Olufemi with me. Olufemi, how realistic is this 1 year mandate to end insecurity in the country? How realistic is this?
One would have expected that the Minister of Defense wait to receive this strategic roadmap and plan as requested from the service chiefs before setting, a deadline, because it was in the same country that we were in 2015 when former President Buhari came, and we all thought it was going to be a matter of weeks and months before we, end the various issues of insurgency, and that was not just the case. Not only did we migrate from, the insurgency in the northeast to other local insecurities, we also had on our hands, by the time the administration was going to be leaving, another major form of insurgency ravaging the northwest, the issue of banditry that is now all over the place. I would expect that the Minister of Defense and, of course, his Minister of State would take time to sit back, considering the fact that they are not also coming from the background of people with military experiences. So to sit down, work with the national security institutions and collectively agree on a timeline rather than giving this deadline, so that we don't end up, starting another journey that will, may not end in the next 8 years like we have seen. So I think the war now must move from the war of words to the war of ideas that is going to be practically, confronted by the administration. It must go beyond, rhetorical approach of making promises and promises. The war has gone beyond that. The war, it's a serious war that is being fought in the country is almost virtually divided along the line of this insecurity from the top. So it's more serious than certain. It's not like a road construction that you're already seeing where it terminates. Nobody can see the end of this yet until there are practical, and very serious approaches that's going to be taken, and not just by the defense ministry alone. It's going to be an all-encompassing approach, which the president, the defense, the service chiefs, and stakeholders in the country will have to be engaged. In the war against insurgency, you must also look at how well are we going to engage the communities, how well are you going to engage other key stakeholders, that are going to be involved. Otherwise, setting a deadline for 1 year, 6 months, or whatever, may not be, realistic.
All right, let's move to Abuja. Mr. Adams, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Nigerians. Good evening. How are you doing?
All right, welcome to the show. I will begin with a question. How realistic is this 1 year mandate to end insecurity in Nigeria?
Sorry, can you take that again? I barely heard you.
And how realistic is this mandate 1 year mandate to end insecurity in Nigeria?
Yeah, we should be very realistic when we come to security and insecurity projections, because 1 year is too short a time to put an end to an issue that has been, on the ground for more than a dozen years, for 24 years already. We know that the crux of developmental issues in Nigeria has to deal with insecurity, has to deal with how to manage the security situation in Nigeria and all of that. So we have to come to a point where we think that as a nation, if we have to make progress, we have to deal with every issue that, pertains to us living and going about our lives with every sense of security, every sense of knowing that we are safe at whatever endeavors we put our hands into. So realistically, if we want to put that, one year is not enough to end insecurity in Nigeria, but 1 year is enough to put a step forward to ending every issues that pertains to the security of a nation. And these issues are: 1, the Boko Haram issue; 2, the banditry issue; 3, ESN and some, elements in the Southeast who try to put a threat to our nationhood. So we have to make it a point of duty as a nation to surmount these threats to our collective existence as a nation before we could forge ahead. So to answer your questions, realistically, 1 year isn't enough to end the collective woes that, try to hold us hostage as a nation. But 1 year is enough to lay the steps that we could build upon to end every threat to our our collective insecurity as a people. Thank you.
Taking a step will be, I don't know if you share this idea that the monthly meeting of all the security agencies to promote synergy and any security as said by the Defense Minister, Mr. Badaru, is actually a new approach. What do you make of it? Do you think it will aid the step you're talking about?
So, to be honest with you, there's a new dispensation, there's a new administration. The administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is poised towards ending every security challenges that were existing before they came on board. And some of these points entails that we would have to find appropriate measures to wedge between threats to our nationhood, and then also find measures to be able to, restore confidence in the populace that, the administration is poised towards ending every challenge, everything that threatens our collective harmony as a nation. So, answering you, it would be that, the present dispensation has put a blueprint, towards ending insecurity. So one of these blueprints entails that the armed forces of Nigeria, which I should have privy information to, the armed forces are disposed to ending every collective threat to our nationhood. And they are capable, and it takes political leadership on the part of the new dispensation to act in a way that would send a message to everybody who constitutes a threat to our security as a people that, yes, the time. And that
I'm sorry, Mr. Adams, but we really need to go to our last story for today. We are almost out of time. We're just trying to manage time. Let's move to our final story. The leadership tussle taking place in Labour Party seems to be unrelenting as confusion continues as the Court of Appeal in Owerri, Imo State, removed Julius Abure as national chairman. The court consequently recognized Lamadi Apapa as national chairman. and one of the Independent National Electoral Commission should deal with in terms of candidates of the party for the coming Imo, Kogi, and Bayelsa governorship election. However, the ruling followed judgment of the Court of Appeal in Benin City in April 14, which affirmed Abure as national chairman. I still have Olufemi and Adams with me. So, Olufemi, I just want you to, briefly, share your thought about what really is happening in Labour Party and how is this court ruling going to affect the internal crisis?
Not yet over for the Labour Party, as far as the crisis within the party is concerned. Just like you said, on August 14, the Court of Appeal in Benin ruled and nullified the suspension of Abure, of course, the problem started from the suspension of Abure from his ward, which was what the Lamidia Papa faction acted upon to affirm his suspension, then bringing Mr. Papa up as the acting national chairman. So there have been controversies since then, leading to the primaries that have been conducted in Imo, Bayelsa, and Kogi to select governorship candidates for this election. The matter taken to the Court of Appeal in Owerri was also in respect of who was the legitimate candidate of the party for the coming election in Imo State. So the controversies are many, and there are still some other litigations in court regarding this same leadership issue between who is the national chairman now and who is not. And I don't think we are going to say the end yet, maybe until the Supreme Court takes a final decision on it. There will continue to be suspension and counter-suspension. The Abure faction has asked that the ruling in Owerri be disregarded, that it has nothing to do with the national leadership, but rather the gubernatorial primaries of the party for the state. So these confusions still persist. We only hope that beyond the court, the party will be matured enough to call itself together and resolve this issue. Otherwise, until we get to the final court, there may not be any end in sight.
All right, Mr. Adams, we just have a few minutes to end the show, but Mr. Olufemi is talking about the confusion, especially about the court ruling, as there have been different version of this whole thing, depending where the interest and loyalty lies. Does this case need to get to Supreme Court to determine final decision?
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court will be the final arbiter on this issue, because we have had varied interpretations of what the judgment of the Court of Appeal has been. There has been indications that the Abure camp, who claim to be the authentic leadership of the Labour Party, has to answer. And then there is this Apapa camp, whom the Court of Appeal has affirmed their legitimacy to, the chairmanship of the party, the leadership of the Labour Party. So we know that we are confident that the Supreme Court, as the final arbiter, will be able to adjudicate properly, on who the authentic leader of the Labour Party is. But in the meantime, Nigerians who support the Labour Party are of the overwhelming opinion, that a side, which I wouldn't want to mention, so I don't want to be taken out of context, is legitimately entitled to the leadership of the party. But as it stands, we are going to be waiting for the Supreme Court. I am a law-abiding citizen, and I know, and I also tell Nigerians to be law-abiding as possible, to wait for the Supreme Court to adjudicate on this particular issue before them. Because I know that the leadership of the Labour Party, Peter Obi, the SY presidential candidate of the party, and his team would want to appeal before the Supreme Court. And I am as confident as every other Nigerian that the Supreme Court would be able to tell us who the authentic leadership of the Labour Party is. So I would want to wait, because I wouldn't want to be prejudicial. I wouldn't want to be taken out of context. I wouldn't want to come ahead of the Supreme Court. I am confident that the Supreme Court would properly give us a direction as where to follow on the particular case of the leadership of the Labour Party. Thank you.
Supreme Court it is to resolve the crisis within the Labour Party. I want to thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Olufemi Lawson, Executive Director, Center for Public Accountability, and as well Adams Abonu, political analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
And as well, thank you for being part of the show. Remember, you can follow the conversation on our social media platforms at TVC News NG on our website or at tvcnews.tv. I am Jacinta Agochukwu. Until next week, it's goodbye.